All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our final Community Weekly for the year 2020. And so we've got, as usual, an action-packed agenda for those to share either here in person, but also those who are recording and watching this on video. And so for today, we got a couple demos to show off. And so we're going to start off with some of the recent work from Stephen and others from the team on root components, and I believe maybe an auth demo as well. Then we're going to switch gears, and James Kalkman is going to share with us some DevDocs updates on some of the cloud improvements to date that I know we've been seeing some interest across the community. And then at the end, we'll do a year in review. So I put together a couple stats to share with the team, both between the product and the community, that we will walk through and kind of wrap things up for this year. And so with that, let's go ahead and turn it over to Stephen and folks, and they're going to show us some of the work in progress on root components. And Stephen, you may be on mute.
Hello?
There you
Hello?
go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, I've been messing around with my headphones. Okay, yeah, so the first thing I'm going to demo today is, well, maybe the only thing, is this feature we added to use the root category ID from the Magento backend rather than the hard-coded value. Previously, and up until now, Venia Concept has had root category hard-coded to 2 for things like the category list page, which is the fallback that you see if you don't have CMS content for your homepage or some other configured content for your homepage. And also in the left nav, the root category was always hard-coded to 2, so you might have different root categories configured for various stores, for your various store views, and the left nav would always render the categories for your default root category. Not sure how often people actually configure that, but now it will respect the variables from the backend, it'll respect the root category from the backend. So really small changes you can see here. The main one is that for the navigation query, we now add another query for just to get the root category ID from the store config. And again, with the recent work with the store switcher, all these queries will respect the store header. So whenever you set your store, that header will get sent, and the store config query will update and return the correct data. So now you can see inside the navigation talon, we've added the get root category ID operation. We added a new query here to use that op. And instead of pulling root category ID off catalog state, which is the Redux provider, which was hard-coded to 2 and we never updated, that root category ID now comes from the data from the query. So there's a small effect here that whenever the data resolves and we don't have one yet, we set the category ID as the root category. So this will just happen on that very first time you render, and it'll render your root category in the left nav. And then same for the CMS page. We now pass root category ID back from the talon. We request it in the query here, and we pull it off, defaulting to null. There was some debate whether we should fall back to 2 or not if the data hasn't resolved yet, but I opted just to prefer not to render the potentially incorrect value. And then I think that CMS page will pass that root category down to the category list query, which just takes that and runs the query to render that page. So what it looks like is this: you've got your app rendering. It'll render your root category for. I'm on the default storefront now for this backend, and you can see I've got my categories for that store view. When I switch to a different store view, it'll set the value in the header, refresh the page. The queries will go out for the new category list for the root category for this store view, which you can see only has a single subcategory within it, and that category is now rendered in the left nav. So yeah, small change, but now this is just a little bit closer to you being able to pick up PWA Studio or Venia Concept and get your storefront running with your backend configuration as desired. I wasn't sure if there was any people on the call for questions, but I will pause.
Yeah, Stephen. So I think a couple comments and questions from Lars. So first of all, he said this is cool very often, and his specific question was, "Is this cached?" Based on what
Uh,
you've shown.
hey Lars, when you say cached, what is this that you're asking about?
Yeah, the main problem is if we are asking the servers about store's configuration before we can render, we increasing the initial page load, or not the initial, but the visual page load for the customer. Because before the behavior was we rendering an empty page and then we have a static to there. So for that reason, we had a ticket and a backlog about, hey, let's fetch a store configuration already if we building something or build our application and cache this.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that's a good question. Um, so what you're talking about is potentially pre-caching or like warming the cache before you render the app for the first time. Um, I don't know that we do that for, at least not in the context here for this specific query, mostly because we haven't quite started optimizing around those prefetches, but we have discussed it internally in terms of if we know that so many components are going to need store config data, to fire off a query as soon as we can. Right now, all the data you see is just the cache is dependent on, at least the browser cache is dependent on whether or your browser has made that request and Apollo has cached the value. So, like I said, we could pass a to as a fallback, which would go and fetch the root category data for two and then render it until the actual root category from the store config data returned, and then at which point it would like go and fetch that new category data and then render it. But that experience, in my opinion, would be a little jarring because you would see content and then it would like flash away and back. So I do think one solution, like you said, is sort of doing like a prefetch or precache, but that's not that wasn't part of this solution. Mainly, the place you'll notice the difference is if you have a category list view here for your homepage, which if you've got Page Builder or you have a custom content for your CMS page, you won't even see this category list. I think right now our default is to render that homepage, the sample Venia content that you see, I think, on like develop. So all this category list isn't used often, but it is sort of like above the fold, I guess you could say. For the other part of this change, it was in the left nav, and we did discuss whether this would be uh, um, like slower than just defaulting to two. And since it's behind a tab in the left nav, I felt like it wasn't as important that there was a little bit of a slower render or that time to first byte for the left nav data because it's behind a tab. User has to click. Unless they're on like a very, very slow connection, by the time the page is rendered and they're able to click this data should already have been fetched. So I guess the most important thing there is this category list pre-cache.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, maybe this is something what we need to tackle in 2021 because I think there are a couple of things or a couple of configuration what maybe is helpful to cache or prefetch, and then we get a better customer experience because we want to get the content fast as possible, and this is maybe not the way where we get fast as possible content. Only if we do a pre-render or something like that.
Right. Yeah. What you're talking about is like pre-optimizing in the build because either way, if you're hitting this page from a cold cache, you're going to have the same issue.
Yeah.
You definitely have to have that something creating that. It can't be browser side because it only starts working as soon as the user hits the page.
Yeah.
But yeah, good points, Lars. Thanks for bringing it up. Any other questions? All right, I'll stop sharing. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. Mr. Kalkaben, you want to share some of the latest on docs?
Yep, I can do that. Screen. Right, you see the Magento Cloud deployment? My browser.
Looking good.
Yep. All right. So we have completely rewritten this topic. It's in the tutorial section. Previous versions of this focused too much on a turnkey approach and specifically just Venia itself, and with the sample data. This new version of this tutorial is more general, and it's supposed to help you actually deploy any storefront, PWA Studio storefront into the cloud. The way this tutorial sets up your environment is you'll have your Magento Cloud project and your storefront project separate, and you build your storefront locally and move your changes to your cloud project, and then you deploy your cloud project into the Magento Cloud service. So this is just this goes over those steps and what you need to do, and these steps are more explicit now. They're more useful details and explanations about what you're doing and what's happening. It goes over to environment variables and why they're important. So check that out and let us know how that goes. I guess any questions from anybody on this? No? All right. Well, speaking of cloud, we also made an update to our Magento 2 Upward connector module. This is the module that connects your Upward PHP to, or that connects, the Upward PHP server to Magento and your storefront. So recently we added support for a pre-render.io service, and we now have configuration to let you describe or configure how what the behavior is for that. And these are the configuration items that you can set in the admin area, and an explanation of what they are. As well as some notes about testing pre-rendered pages and troubleshooting. But most of the docs you can also find on their site. Are there any questions on that? You can find that in the actual repo, Magento 2 Upward Connector. Any questions?
No questions. I think just comments. I think people really love seeing some of the new content here. I think it addresses some of the questions that we're seeing even more often now as more cloud customers pick up PWA and such. And so thank you so much for putting these together. And yeah, if folks have feedback about this, let us know, and we'll continue to evolve. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I really appreciate the update.
Great. Any other updates from the team here before we switch over to year in review?
I can probably talk a little bit about some of the schedule sign out stuff that we have coming. So.
Oh, perfect.
I will share screen here in a second. Okay, y'all see my screen?
We do.
Okay. So we've had a couple of issues that we've noticed where the behavior when a signed in user has their authentication expire is less than desirable, right? Essentially, it leaves them in kind of a broken state. So if you're in the middle of an important workflow like cart or checkout or something, obviously if your auth is expired, we don't want to let you proceed through checkout, right? Your auth is expired, so we need to do something about it. And since we don't have the front controller in session like we would in Magento 2, that means that we need to handle something on the client for now. And so while we work out how to get refresh tokens going, the most important thing is to push the user through an actual sign out flow automatically without making them do it, so that they can sign back in and get right back to what they were doing. Right now, the way that we store the token when they sign in is here in local storage, along with things like card ID and all of the Apollo cache. And whenever we try to read that token, let's see here, right? Whenever we try to read this token, it checks the time to life here, which is an hour, and the time stored, and it compares it to now, and it says, okay, if this thing has expired, then I'm actually not going to give you the token back. I'm going to clear it out of local storage. And that way you should know you're signed out. But since the code for this can't actually dispatch a sign out action, the app still thinks you're signed in. And so it doesn't fail until GraphQL or something similar throws an error. And that's really not ideal. So we need to do something about it. So what I have written here is a Redux middleware that will look at actions as they flow through the system, and it will set up a timer based on that TTL and automatically dispatch a sign out action. So then it'll just take one quick sign in and everything is back to where it should be. So we take a look at that here. We still do use Redux, as we know, and one of the few things that we still keep in Redux is the state about whether the user is signed in or not. So what we want to do here with the auth middleware is essentially keep some timers and watch for the following actions. We look for when token is set, look for when clear token is set, or when user details are fetched. And if we determine that based on those actions, the user signed in, then we can set a timer here for exactly when that auth token is due to expire. And so this timer will be sitting during the user's entire session, and then when their token expires, the timer will fire and sign them out. And of course, if they close the site and come back, then this will look again when the user's details are fetched, right? They'll be automatically signed in because they're returning to the site. It'll look at their details, set a new timer for exactly when it times out. So we can actually test this, I believe, by setting this to something like, 30 seconds or so. And then when we refresh the page, it'll set a timer, and we can actually go see that it'll automatically sign us out. It's too long. Let's set a shorter timer. Well, I think that's still going to be too long of a timer for it to go. But the point is, it'll automatically sign you out in the background, and then you can just come in here and re-sign in. All right. Any questions about the flow? If there's any suggestions on how you would like to go about handling the user once we actually know that their tokens expired, we're kind of figuring out next steps from here. We'll probably look into doing a refresh automatically in the background when it's due to expire. We'll go fetch it automatically, or maybe prompt user to see if they're still active, and if they're active, then go fetch a new token. But as we figure out that UX, be interested in feedback and suggestions along the way.
Great. Thank you so much, Jimmy. So any questions from the team on this one? All right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think also good opportunity to add feedback and questions in the GitHub issue as well. So as this evolves, so this will be a good
definitely.
kind of work in progress. So, okay. Well, very good. We've got a couple minutes left here, so I wanted to kind of step back and share some of the latest numbers for Studio. I know that we talk about this quite a bit internally, and and sometimes at events, and so I thought it would be a good opportunity to kind of step back to really, I would say, celebrate some of the recent successes of the team. I think when you look at what we've done in what is essentially a relative short amount of time, it's pretty impressive. So we're going to go through three slides, kind of three different themes here. So when you think about year in review, I couldn't be more proud of the team here, the team across teams and really the Magento ecosystem for being part of what we're doing. At the moment, if you think about what we're doing, the amount of members that we interact with at various times in our community channel is larger than many towns in Texas. And so I think that the grand scope that we're looking at here, it continues to get larger and larger. And if you believe that GitHub stars are, I think, a good proxy for that, that's on a really good trend as well. But ultimately, this comes down to the support and the contributors to date. And I just want to say thank you again to Lars and Jordan. I know Lars is on the call now. Jordan had a conflict, but they are very often the front line to not only the feedback, but really helping others get started with PWA Studio. And so what you see here on the right is the latest, probably the year-end close for contributions itself. But the reality is what the community does is well more than just the code. And so you'll start to see more and more of that in how we start to show experiments, work in progress, other ideas as we evolve Venya, but also PWA Studio as a whole. So what does this all mean for adoption? So adoption has been beyond really any internal expectations. And part of this is based on some of the work that we've done to really spider out and use things like built with to understand what's currently out there and built with PWA Studio. And so very often we're asked kind of who's using PWA Studio, and the reality is we don't have to worry about word of mouth. We can use things like built with, which we'll go through here in the next slide, to really track the examples. But to date, we are capturing and we kind of identifying 60 plus stores that are built using PWA Studio. But in reality is there are almost 150 examples out there. Some of those may be country variants, some of those may be demos, and in some cases actually staging sites for stores that are about to launch, which is pretty exciting. Our launches are becoming more frequent. I see probably 4 or 5 of these via report a week, and they're getting bigger and more complex. And as you see here on the right, there's some pretty big names here. And these are ones that we don't always talk about, but the reality is that you can see these in publicly available reports like Built With and others. And this is on top of the 25 or so extensions and themes that support PWA Studio today. These, of course, will be part of our eventual movement into the marketplace itself. But these often hit key areas and functionality that are really important for the overall adoption, but also for developers to extend and work through areas that may be in development ourselves and/or help with these customer launches. And in the end, the key metrics that we're looking at and we hear from customers are often around performance, engagement, and of course conversion. The reality is it has a lot to do with kind of where you started and where you ended, but in general, we're seeing about twice as much performance per Google Lighthouse. We're seeing roughly 30% more engagement, so essentially the amount of time spent, and then some of the related engagement to kind of come back to the site. But this is really impressive if you look at these names. Again, we only talk about these from time to time, but you can see a lot of these for yourself. And you can see a lot of these for yourself on Built With. There's a link here. I created a short link for the team here. And these are the 149 examples. So again, the ones that we verify, the ones that we've deduped are closer to that 60. But if you look at the examples, there are many of these that are already in progress, and it really brings kind of brings to light like the adoption that we're starting to see of this. And this is really a tribute to all of what we've done. It's really been about adoption. It's been about the community and allowing them to shape with what we're doing for this one. So I just want to say thank you to the team here. Thank you to the community, and especially thank you to Lars and Jordan for bringing this together. It's been a heck of a year, and really building on all the great progress we've done over the past 2 years on PWA Studio. And we continue to move forward, and we've got a lot of great work next year. So any questions about this data? Anything? Any additional comments for the team before we wrap things up? Everybody's being very shy at the end of the year, which is totally fine. So, well, good. Well, so last but not least, and so just want to say, 2021 will continue to be a very strong year for what we're doing. There's a couple demos that we already got queued up with a couple folks like Kevin from Vimo. Jordan's got a couple ideas around filtering that you'll start to see coming out the gate. Just with it being the holidays, availability is a little bit tougher. So you'll start to see more and more of these, and you'll also start to see more and more opportunities for contribution. So we've been talking to Lars and Jordan about key areas around extensibility, things like additional payment types, tag management, and then the other areas. They're going to help us bring us faster into that. And so look for more updates on kind of where you can help us move faster with regard to both PWA Studio as a set of tools, but also Venya. And so we're rounding the corner on that. We're preparing for the PWA Studio 9 release, which will be part of 2.4.2 in February. And we're going to keep going. B2C first, and then B2B. We're hoping to start later in the year for that one. But that's kind of everything in a nutshell. And again, just want to say thank you to everybody who's been part of it. It's been quite a journey, but couldn't be happier with what we've done in the adoption to date across the ecosystem. So, any other questions or comments? All right. Well, that's a wrap. We'll enjoy the rest of your day, your week, and year. Thanks again to everybody. And we're going to skip the next 2 weeks because of the holidays, but we will return just after the new year to kick things off right. So thanks again, everybody. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, see you next year.